The woman stumbled into White Pine, Montana territory, on a Tuesday morning in August of 1877, her worn boots kicking up dust as she walked past the general store with her head down, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hand. Rafe Brennan watched from where he stood outside the trading post, his broad shoulders blocking most of the morning sun as it filtered through the pine trees that gave the town its name. His dark hair hung past his collar, and the sleeves of his shirt were rolled up over forearms thick with muscle from years of trapping and hunting in the Montana wilderness. He had come down from his cabin in the mountains for supplies, a trip he made only once a month when necessity demanded it. The woman looked lost, her brown eyes darting from building to building as though searching for something she could not find. Her dress was patched but clean, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun that had started to come loose during what must have been a long journey. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, and there was something desperate in the way she held that paper, like it contained all the answers she needed but could not access. Rafe shifted the sack of flour on his shoulder and was about to continue loading his horse when the woman approached the blacksmith across the street. He could hear her voice, soft and uncertain, asking a question. The blacksmith pointed toward the church at the end of the main road, and the woman nodded, but Rafe noticed she looked at the paper again with an expression of pure confusion before she started walking in the wrong direction entirely. Something about her vulnerability stirred something in his chest. Living alone in the mountains for the past 5 years had not completely eroded his sense of decency, though it had made him wary of most people. Still, he found himself crossing the dusty street before he could talk himself out of it. "Miss," he called out, his voice deeper than he intended. "Miss, you are heading toward the saloon. The church is the other way." She turned quickly, startled, and he saw her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Up close, she was even younger than he had thought, with a smattering of freckles across her nose and eyes that held both fear and determination in equal measure. She started, then stopped. Her fingers tightened on the paper. "I am looking for Reverend Matthews. I was told he might help me find work." "That would be at the church," Rafe said, gentling his tone. He gestured back down the street. "2 buildings down on the left, white building with the cross." She looked in the direction he pointed, then back at the paper in her hand. For a moment, something like panic crossed her face, quickly hidden. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your kindness." She started to walk away, and Rafe should have let her go. Should have finished loading his supplies and headed back up into the mountains where life was simple and predictable. But something made him call after her again. "You just arrive in White Pine." She stopped, turning back to face him. There was wariness in her expression now, the natural caution of a woman alone in a rough town. "This morning," she admitted. "On the stage from Helena." "Long journey," Rafe observed. He stayed where he was, not wanting to crowd her or make her more nervous. "You got people here?" She shook her head. "No, but I was told there might be work. I can cook and clean. I am a hard worker." There was something fierce in the way she said it, a pride that spoke of someone who had known hardship but refused to be broken by it. Rafe found himself respecting that. "The Reverend will likely know of families needing help," he said. "The Hutchinsons just had their 4th child. Might be they could use an extra pair of hands." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Rafe Brennan." "Beatrice Holt," she said, and offered him a small, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Brennan." This time when she walked toward the church, Rafe did let her go. He finished loading his horse and tried not to think about the lost look in her eyes when she had stared at that paper, or the way her smile had made something in his chest tighten. He had built a good life in the mountains, away from the complications that came with caring about people. He did not need to get involved in the struggles of a young woman passing through White Pine. But 3 days later, when he was supposed to be halfway back to his cabin, Rafe found himself still in town, telling himself he needed to stock up on a few more things before winter, even though winter was still months away. He saw Beatrice twice, once coming out of the general store with a basket of vegetables, and once walking with Mrs. Hutchinson and her children. She seemed to have found her place, and that should have been enough to ease whatever odd sense of responsibility he felt toward her. It was not enough. On the 4th day, he was sitting outside the saloon with a cup of coffee, watching the evening shadows lengthen across the street, when he saw her emerge from the Hutchinson house. She looked tired, her shoulders sagging as she made her way to the small boarding house where she must have taken a room. As she passed under the awning of the general store, a man stumbled out of the saloon behind Rafe, drunk and mean-looking. "Hey, pretty girl," the man called out, his voice slurred. "Where you going in such a hurry?" Beatrice kept walking, her pace quickening, but the drunk followed her into the street. Rafe was on his feet before he consciously made the decision to move. "Come on, do not be unfriendly," the drunk said, reaching for her arm. Rafe's hand closed around the man's wrist before he could touch her. "The lady does not want to talk to you," Rafe said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. The drunk turned, bleary eyes trying to focus on Rafe's face. What he saw there must have gotten through even his alcohol-soaked brain, because he jerked his hand back and muttered something that might have been an apology, before stumbling back into the saloon. Beatrice stood frozen in the middle of the street, her face pale. "Thank you," she said, and her voice shook slightly. "Again, you keep helping me, Mr. Brennan." "Some men do not know how to treat a lady," Rafe said. He studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "You settling in all right? The Hutchinsons treating you well?" "They are wonderful," she said quickly. "Mrs. Hutchinson is very kind and the children are sweet. It is good, honest work." But there was something in her voice, a strain that suggested things were not quite as simple as she wanted him to believe. Rafe had learned to read people during his years in the wilderness, where misreading a situation could get you killed. He could tell when someone was hiding something. "You had supper yet?" he asked on impulse. Beatrice blinked, surprised. "No, but I should not impose, not an imposition. I was about to head to the restaurant anyway. Could use the company." That was a lie. Rafe had been perfectly content to eat the dried meat and hardtack he had in his saddlebags, but the words were out now, and he found he did not want to take them back. She hesitated, and he could see her trying to decide if it was proper. Finally, she nodded. "That would be very kind. Thank you." The restaurant was a small establishment run by a Chinese couple who had come to Montana during the gold rush days and stayed after the claims dried up. The food was simple but good, and Rafe had eaten there often enough that the owners greeted him with nods as he and Beatrice took a table near the window. They ordered stew and cornbread, and for a few minutes they ate in silence. Rafe was not much for small talk, and Beatrice seemed content to focus on her food. But as the meal went on, he found himself curious about her. "Where are you from originally?" he asked. "Nebraska," she said. "Small farming community east of Omaha. My parents had a homestead there." Had. Her expression closed off slightly. "They passed 2 years ago, fever. After that I stayed with my brother and his wife, but—" She trailed off, poking at her stew with her spoon. "It was not a good situation. His wife did not want me there. I saved what money I could and bought a ticket west. Someone told me there was work in Montana Territory." "That is a brave thing," Rafe said. "Coming out here alone." She looked up at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes again. "I would rather be brave and hungry than safe and unwanted." Rafe understood that sentiment better than she might have guessed. It was part of why he had left civilization behind for his mountain cabin 5 years ago, after his own family situation had fallen apart. Sometimes starting over meant leaving everything familiar behind. "What about you?" Beatrice asked, apparently deciding turnabout was fair. "Are you from White Pine originally?" "Colorado," he said. "Grew up in the mountains there, came north after." He paused, realizing he was about to share more than he had intended. "After things did not work out the way I planned. I trap in the winter, hunt and trade the rest of the year. Got a cabin about 15 miles northeast of here." "That sounds lonely," she said softly. "Peaceful," he corrected. "Though I suppose it can be both." She smiled at that. A small, understanding smile that suggested she knew something about loneliness herself. They finished their meal talking about inconsequential things, the beauty of the Montana landscape, the coming autumn, the way White Pine had grown in recent years as more settlers moved west. It was easy conversation, easier than Rafe had expected, and when they stepped out into the cool evening air, he found himself reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for supper," Beatrice said, "and for your kindness. You barely know me, but you have helped me more than I can repay." "No repayment needed," Rafe said. He walked her to the boarding house, acutely aware of how small she seemed next to him, how delicate. It stirred up protective instincts he thought he had buried. "You take care of yourself, Miss Holt." "Beatrice," she said, "please. After everything, I think we can use first names." "Beatrice," he repeated and liked the way it sounded. "You take care, Beatrice." He headed back to the saloon to retrieve his horse, telling himself he would leave for his cabin in the morning. He had already stayed in town far longer than usual, and winter supplies would not gather themselves. But as he bedded down in the small room he had rented, he found himself thinking about green eyes and a determined smile, and wondering what secrets Beatrice Holt was still keeping. The next morning, Rafe was loading his horse when he saw Beatrice hurrying down the street from the Hutchinson house, her face flushed with distress. She was carrying a basket of laundry, and she kept glancing down at a piece of paper in her other hand with that same confused, almost panicked expression he had noticed the first day. Before he could call out to her, she nearly collided with the post outside the general store. So focused was she on trying to make sense of whatever was written on that paper. The basket tilted, and linen started to spill into the dirt. Rafe was there in 3 long strides, catching the basket before it could append completely. "Careful," he said. Beatrice looked up at him, and he saw tears of frustration in her eyes before she quickly blinked them away. "I am so clumsy," she said, trying to laugh it off. "Thank you, She trailed off, staring at the paper in her hand with an expression of such helpless misery that Rafe's chest tightened. "What is wrong?" he asked quietly. For a long moment she did not answer. Then, in a voice so soft he almost did not hear it, she said, "Mrs. Hutchinson gave me a list of things to purchase at the store, and She swallowed hard. "I cannot rate it." The confession hung in the air between them. Rafe looked at her face, at the shame and vulnerability written there, and understood suddenly why she had looked so lost that first day, why she had seemed panicked when looking at papers, why she had walked in the wrong direction even after being told where to go. "I cannot read," she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "I never learned. My parents needed me working the farm, and there was no school close enough, and then they died, and my brother said there was no point in educating a woman anyway, and She stopped, pressing her lips together as if physically holding back more words. "I am sorry. I should not be bothering you with this." "You are not bothering me," Rafe said firmly. He looked at the paper, then at her. "What does Mrs. Hutchinson need from the store? You do not have to. Tell me. I will help you get what is on the list," For a moment, Beatrice looked like she might argue, then her shoulders sagged with relief and she handed him the paper. "I hate this," she whispered, feeling so helpless over something so simple. Rafe read the list quickly. Flour, sugar, coffee, and some thread. Easy enough. He looked at her, seeing the way she held herself stiffly, as if braced for judgment or mockery. Not knowing how to read does not make you helpless. You made it all the way from Nebraska to Montana on your own. That takes more courage than most people have. Some of the tension left her shoulders. But I had to have people read things for me the whole way, schedules and tickets and signs. I felt like such a fool. "You are not a fool," Rafe said. "You just never had the chance to learn. That is different." They went into the general store together, and Rafe helped her select the items on Mrs. Hutchinson's list. As the clerk wrapped the purchases, Beatrice counted out coins from her small purse with careful precision, and Rafe noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Outside, she took the wrapped parcels and placed them carefully in her basket. "Thank you," she said, for not making me feel worse than I already do." "Beatrice," Rafe said and waited until she looked up at him. "If you want, I could teach you." Her eyes widened. "What?" "To read," he clarified. "I could teach you. I am in town for a few more days, and after that—" He paused, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. "After that, if you were willing, you could come to my cabin in the evenings. I could teach you by candlelight. Would not take but an hour or two a few nights a week." Beatrice stared at him like he had offered her the moon. "You would do that?" Why? Rafe thought about that. He could say it was simple kindness, or that he had nothing better to do with his evenings, but the truth was more complicated. The truth was that something about this woman called to him, made him want to help her, protect her, see her smile. The truth was that he had not felt this drawn to anyone in years, and it scared him even as it pulled him forward. "Because everyone should have the chance to learn," he said finally. "Because you deserve to not feel helpless, because—" He stopped, not quite ready to voice the rest. "Because I want to help." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of frustration. "I would like that very much," she said. "More than you know." "Tonight then," Rafe said. "After you finish your work. There is a table out back of the boarding house. We can start there." Beatrice nodded, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise over the mountains. "Tonight," she agreed, and so it began. That evening, as the sun set over White Pine and the shadows grew long, Rafe sat at a rough wooden table behind the boarding house with a slate he had borrowed from the schoolteacher and a piece of chalk. Beatrice arrived still wearing her work dress, her hair escaping its pins after a long day, but her eyes were bright with anticipation. "I do not even know where to start," she admitted as she sat down across from him. "The beginning," Rafe said. He wrote the letter on the slate. "This is a—" Makes an ah sound like an apple. He had expected teaching to be awkward, but it came more naturally than he thought. Perhaps it was because Beatrice was so eager to learn, leaning forward to study each letter he drew, repeating the sounds back to him with intense concentration. Or perhaps it was because, sitting across from her in the soft evening light, watching her face light up each time she mastered a new letter, felt like the most right thing Rafe had done in years. They worked until the light faded too much to see clearly, and then Rafe pulled out a candle and lit it, the warm glow casting dancing shadows across their makeshift classroom. "We can stop if you are tired," he offered, but Beatrice shook her head. "No, please, just a little longer." So they continued, and Rafe found himself drawn into her joy at each small victory. When she successfully wrote all 5 vowels on her own, she looked up at him with such pure happiness that his breath caught. "I did it," she said, almost wonderingly. "I actually wrote them." "You did," Rafe confirmed and could not help smiling back at her. As the days passed, Their evening lessons became the highlight of Rafe's existence. He found excuses to delay his return to the cabin, telling himself he needed to finish what he had started, that he could not abandon Beatrice now that she was making progress. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He did not want to leave her. By the end of the first week, Beatrice could recognize all the letters and write her own name. The look on her face when she signed Beatrice Holt for the first time nearly undid Rafe. "My name," she breathed, staring at the slate. "I wrote my own name." "You did," Rafe said, his voice rough with emotion he did not quite understand. She looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment, something warm and electric that made Rafe's heart beat faster. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this gift, for your patience, for treating me like I matter." "You do matter," Rafe said, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. The second week they moved on to simple words: cat, dog, sun, moon. Beatrice absorbed it all like parched earth soaking up rain. During the days, Rafe found himself thinking about their evening lessons, planning what to teach her next, looking forward to seeing her face light up with understanding. It was during the third week that everything shifted. They were sitting at the table behind the boarding house as usual, the candle flickering between them as Beatrice practiced writing short sentences. She had progressed faster than Rafe had expected, her determination driving her forward. The evening was cool, and she had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "Read that back to me," Rafe instructed, pointing to a sentence she had just written. Beatrice leaned forward, squinting slightly in the candlelight. "The cat sits on the mat." She looked up, grinning. "I read it. I actually read it." "You did," Rafe said, and found himself grinning back at her. She was so close, leaning across the table, her face illuminated by the warm candlelight. He could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, the curve of her smile, the joy radiating from her. And suddenly, sitting there in the gathering darkness with this remarkable woman, Rafe realized he had fallen in love. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow. Somewhere between teaching her letters and watching her determination, between her shy smiles and her fierce pride, he had given her his heart without even realizing it was happening. "Rafe," Beatrice said, her smile fading slightly. "Is something wrong? You look strange." "No," he managed. "Nothing is wrong." But everything was wrong, because in a few days he would have to return to his cabin, and she would stay here in White Pine with her job and her new life. He had no right to want more from her, no right to hope she might feel the same pull he did. She was just learning to stand on her own feet. The last thing she needed was a mountain man with no education beyond what his mother had taught him and no prospects beyond his trap lines. "Rafe," Beatrice said again, and this time she reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were small and warm against his. "Thank you for everything. These past few weeks learning to read, it has changed everything for me. But more than that, your friendship has meant more than I can say." Friendship. The word should have been enough. Should have been more than he had any right to hope for. But sitting there with her hand on his, Rafe wanted to tell her the truth. Wanted to say that somewhere between the letters and the candlelight, he had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with her. Instead, he turned his hand over and squeezed hers gently. "You have worked hard. You should be proud of yourself." She held his gaze for a long moment, and Rafe could have sworn he saw something deeper in her eyes, something that matched the longing in his chest. But then she pulled her hand back and looked down at the slate. "We should probably stop for tonight," she said quietly. "It is getting late." Rafe wanted to protest, wanted to keep her there in the candlelight for just a little longer, but he nodded. "Same time tomorrow." "Yes," she said, and when she looked up again, there was something uncertain in her expression. "Rafe, when will you go back to your cabin?" "Soon," he admitted. I have already stayed longer than I planned. Need to start preparing for winter. Something like distress crossed her face. Oh, of course, I understand. But I will come back, he added quickly. In a few weeks when I come down for supplies, we can continue the lessons then. That would be wonderful, Beatrice said, but her smile did not quite reach her eyes. They said good night, and Rafe walked back to his room at the saloon with a heavy heart. He had never been good at denying himself what he wanted, but he had also never been the kind of man to take advantage of someone vulnerable. Beatrice was building a new life, finding her independence. He would not complicate that by confessing feelings she might not return. But the next evening, everything changed. Rafe arrived at their usual spot to find Beatrice already there. But instead of looking eager for their lesson, she looked upset. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands were clenched in her lap. "What happened?" Rafe asked, immediately on alert. He sat down across from her, resisting the urge to reach for her. "Did someone hurt you?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing like that. It is just—" She took a shaky breath. "Mrs. Hutchinson told me today that she is pregnant again. She will not need my help anymore once the baby comes. She was very kind about it, gave me 2 weeks' notice, but—" Her voice broke. "I will need to find new work, and I do not know where to go or what to do." Relief that she was not hurt warred with concern for her situation. "There are other families in town who might need help." "Maybe," Beatrice said, but she did not sound convinced. "Or maybe I should move on. Try Helena or somewhere bigger where there might be more opportunities." The thought of her leaving White Pine, leaving him, hit Rafe like a punch to the gut. "You do not have to decide right now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You have 2 weeks. Something will work out." "Will it?" She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes now. "I am so tired, Rafe. Tired of being alone, tired of not knowing what comes next, tired of always having to be strong. Sometimes I just want—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I am sorry. I should not burden you with this." "You are not a burden," Rafe said firmly. He could not help himself anymore. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. They were cold, trembling. "Listen to me, Beatrice. You are the strongest, bravest person I know. You came out here alone, you found work, you are learning to read. You have done all that by yourself. But you do not have to do it alone anymore." She looked up at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "What do you mean?" This was it. The moment where he could either keep his feelings to himself and let her go, or risk everything by telling her the truth. Rafe had faced down bears and mountain lions, survived blizzards and floods, but nothing had ever terrified him as much as what he was about to do. "Come with me," he said, "to my cabin, not as a hired hand or an employee, but as—" He swallowed hard. "As my wife, if you will have me." Beatrice stared at him, her mouth falling open. "What?" "I know it is sudden," Rafe rushed on, afraid that if he stopped he would lose his nerve. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but Beatrice, these weeks with you have been the best of my life. Teaching you, talking with you, being near you. It has all made me realize that the life I thought I wanted, alone in the mountains, that is not really living. You make me want more. You make me want to come down from that cabin, build something here in town, make a life that has room for more than just survival." "Rafe," she whispered, and tears were streaming down her face now. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now that he had started. "I am in love with you, Beatrice Holt. I do not have much to offer. I am rough around the edges, not educated or refined, but I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will protect you, provide for you, and we can keep having our lessons by candlelight, learning together. Just please do not leave. Do not go to Helena or anywhere else. Stay here. Stay with me." For a long, terrible moment, Beatrice just stared at him, tears running down her face. Then she laughed, a sound somewhere between a sob and pure joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Rafe felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. "You will?" "Yes," she said again, and now she was smiling through her tears. "Rafe, I have been falling in love with you since that first day when you helped me find the church. Every evening we spent together, every letter you taught me, every time you looked at me like I was something precious instead of something broken, I fell a little more. I thought I was being foolish, thought a man like you could never want someone like me, but—" She squeezed his hands. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Rafe stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. He moved around the table and pulled Beatrice to her feet, and then she was in his arms, and nothing had ever felt so right. She was small against his chest, fitting perfectly under his chin, and when she wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight, Rafe felt like he had finally found home. "I love you," she murmured against his shirt. "I love you so much." He pulled back just enough to tilt her face up to his, and then he kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something infinitely precious. She kissed him back with a passion that surprised him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rafe rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "I will talk to Reverend Matthews tomorrow. We can be married as soon as you want." "Soon," Beatrice said. "As soon as possible." They spent the rest of the evening making plans instead of practicing letters, though they did not move far from each other's arms. Rafe would speak to the Reverend in the morning, and they would set a date. In the meantime, he would start building an addition to his cabin, or perhaps they would build a house in town. They discussed it all, voices low and excited, hands intertwined across the table. "I do not need much," Beatrice insisted. "Your cabin sounds wonderful." "You deserve wonderful," Rafe countered. "You deserve everything." "I just want you," she said simply, and the truth in her eyes made his heart clench. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church at the end of White Pines Main Street. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Hutchinson had helped her alter, and Rafe wore new trousers and a shirt that actually fit his broad shoulders. The ceremony was short, attended by the few friends they had made in town. But when Rafe slipped a simple gold band on Beatrice's finger and promised to love her for the rest of his days, he meant every word with every fiber of his being. Beatrice's vows were equally heartfelt, her voice shaking with emotion as she promised to stand by him through everything life might bring. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife and told Rafe he could kiss his bride, Rafe pulled Beatrice close and kissed her with all the love and longing he had been holding back, and the small congregation cheered. The wedding celebration was held at the restaurant, and the Chinese couple who owned it prepared a feast in honor of the occasion. There was laughter and music, and Beatrice glowed with happiness, her hand never leaving Rafe's. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for the cabin that would now be their home, Mrs. Hutchinson pulled Beatrice aside. "You found a good man," she said, hugging the younger woman. "I am happy for you." "Thank you," Beatrice said, "for everything. For giving me work when I needed it, for your kindness." "You earned it all with your hard work," Mrs. Hutchinson replied. "Now go, be happy." Rafe had brought his horse and a small wagon for Beatrice's few possessions. As they rode out of White Pine toward the mountains, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. Beatrice sat close to Rafe on the wagon seat, her head resting against his shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Rafe asked as they began the climb up into the foothills. "No," Beatrice said, and she sounded surprised by her own certainty. "I am not nervous at all. I feel like I am finally going home." The cabin was small but sturdy, built from logs Rafe had cut himself. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a stream running nearby and a view of the mountains that took Beatrice's breath away. Inside, there was a large stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and the few books Rafe owned. "It is not much," Rafe said, suddenly seeing the space through Beatrice's eyes and finding it wanting. "But I will add on. Build you a proper kitchen, maybe another room." Beatrice turned to him, her eyes shining. "It is perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, by the light of the fire and a single candle, they came together as husband and wife. Rafe was gentle, reverent, treating Beatrice like the gift she was. And when she fell asleep in his arms, her blonde hair spread across his chest, and a smile on her face, Rafe stared up at the ceiling beams and marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. The next morning, he woke to find Beatrice already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Good morning, wife," he murmured into her hair. She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "Good morning, husband." They fell into a routine over the following days and weeks. Rafe would hunt and trap, teaching Beatrice the ways of the mountains, showing her which plants were safe to eat and which to avoid, how to read animal tracks and weather signs. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit at the table by candlelight, and Rafe would continue her reading lessons. Beatrice was an eager student, and her progress was remarkable. Within a month, she could read simple sentences from the books on Rafe's shelves. Within 2 months, she was working her way through his worn copy of a frontier novel, sounding out the more difficult words with determination. "You are a natural," Rafe told her one evening as she finished a chapter and looked up at him with triumph. "I have a good teacher," she countered, reaching across the table to take his hand. These quiet evenings by candlelight became Rafe's favorite time of day. Sometimes they would read together, Beatrice practicing her skills while Rafe listened and helped with difficult words. Other times they would simply talk, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future. They spoke of children they might have one day, of building a larger house, of the life they were creating together. As autumn deepened into winter, Rafe worked on expanding the cabin, adding a proper kitchen and a second room. Beatrice helped where she could, learning carpentry alongside reading, proving herself capable in ways that constantly amazed him. "Where did you learn to swing a hammer like that?" he asked one afternoon, watching her drive nails with practiced efficiency. "My father," she said. "He taught me a lot about building and fixing things, said a woman should know how to take care of herself." Her expression grew sad. "I wish you could have met him. He would have liked you." Rafe set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "I wish I could have met him too," he said. "And your mother. I would have thanked them for raising such an incredible daughter." Winter came hard and fast that year, with snow drifts that reached the windows and winds that howled through the pines. But inside the cabin, everything was warm and cozy. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading together, talking, making love. Rafe had never been happier, and he could see the same contentment in Beatrice's eyes. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside and the candle burned low between them, Beatrice set down the book she had been reading and looked at Rafe with an expression he could not quite read. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "I have something to tell you," she said, and there was nervousness in her voice but also joy. "I am with child." For a moment, Rafe could not process the words. Then understanding crashed over him, followed by a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked him over. "You are pregnant," she confirmed, smiling now. "I think it will be born sometime in late spring or early summer." Rafe was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she must have been able to feel his joy radiating from him. "Happy," he pulled back to look at her face. "Beatrice, I am beyond happy. I am." He could not find the words, so he kissed her instead, trying to pour everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "I am a little scared," Beatrice admitted. "I do not know much about babies." "We will learn together," Rafe promised. "Just like everything else." As winter gave way to spring, Beatrice's belly grew round with their child. Rafe became even more protective, insisting she rest more, do less heavy work. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. The lessons by candlelight continued, though now they read books about child rearing alongside novels and newspapers Rafe brought back from his monthly trips to White Pine. Beatrice had become a confident reader, able to work through almost any text with only occasional help. "You should be proud," Rafe told her one evening. "You have come so far." "We have come so far," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." In June, when the wildflowers were blooming in the meadows and the streams were running high with snowmelt, Beatrice went into labor. Rafe had brought a midwife from White Pine to stay with them for the last few weeks of the pregnancy, an older woman named Martha, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, and Rafe paced outside the cabin, afraid he would wear a groove in the ground. Every cry from inside made him want to break down the door, but Martha had firmly told him this was women's work, and he needed to stay out of the way. Finally, after what felt like years but was probably only hours, Martha emerged with a smile on her weather-beaten face. "Come meet your son," she said. Rafe nearly tripped over his own feet in his haste to get inside. Beatrice was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up and saw him, her smile could have lit up the entire territory. "Meet your son," she said, echoing Martha's words. Rafe approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby was tiny, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair. When Rafe reached out a finger, the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Rafe whispered. "You are perfect." "I cannot believe." His voice broke, and Beatrice reached for his hand with her free one. "We made him," she said. "Out of all this love, we made this perfect little person." They named him Thomas after Beatrice's father and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, sleeping well and eating heartily, growing stronger every day. Rafe took to fatherhood like he had been born for it, staying up nights to walk a fussy Tommy when Beatrice needed rest, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies in his deep voice. The lessons by candlelight paused for a few months after Tommy's birth, but eventually they resumed. Beatrice would nurse Tommy while Rafe read aloud, or they would take turns reading to each other while the baby slept between them. The cabin that had once held just one lonely man now overflowed with life and love and laughter. As Tommy grew into a toddler, curious and energetic, Rafe built additions to the cabin until it was a proper house with multiple rooms. They talked about moving closer to White Pine to give Tommy more opportunities, but in the end, they both agreed they loved their life in the mountains too much to leave. When Tommy was 3, Beatrice became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Rose after Rafe's mother. Rose had Beatrice's green eyes and golden hair, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Rafe's trapping business grew prosperous, and he was able to provide well for his growing family. Beatrice became an accomplished reader and even started teaching Tommy his letters, passing on the gift Rafe had given her. Every evening after the children were in bed, Rafe and Beatrice would sit at their table by candlelight, reading together or simply talking about their day. These quiet moments remained sacred, a connection back to how their love had begun. You remember that first night? Beatrice asked one evening when Tommy was 6 and Rose was 3. When I told you I could not read, I remember being terrified, Rafe admitted. Terrified that you would leave town before I could get up the courage to tell you how I felt. I was terrified too, Beatrice said. So ashamed of not knowing something so basic, but you never made me feel stupid or less than. You just helped me, no judgment, no expectations. You helped me too, Rafe said. I did not even realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. You taught me how to live again, not just survive. Beatrice stood and came around the table to sit in his lap, something she still did even after all these years. We taught each other, she said, kissing him softly, and we are still teaching each other. As more years passed, Tommy and Rose grew into fine children. Tommy had his father's build, already broad-shouldered and strong at 12, while Rose had her mother's determination and quick mind at 9. Both children were being taught to read and write, a gift their parents insisted upon. Beatrice, who had once been ashamed of her illiteracy, now helped other women in the area who had never learned. Once a week, she would hold lessons in their home, teaching any woman who wanted to learn. Rafe was proud of her, proud of how she had taken her struggle and turned it into something that helped others. When Tommy was 15 and Rose was 12, Beatrice became pregnant once more, surprising both her and Rafe. We are getting too old for this, she laughed, though she was glowing with happiness. Never too old, Rafe countered, his hand resting on her still flat belly. This child is a blessing, just like the others. Their third child, a son they named James, was born in the spring of 1893. He was a happy baby, adored by his older siblings and doted on by his parents. The house rang with laughter and life, so different from the lonely cabin where Rafe had once lived. Beatrice continued her reading lessons for other women, and Rafe's business continued to prosper. They had built a good life, a full life, surrounded by love and family. But through it all, every single evening, they maintained their tradition. After the children were in bed, Rafe and Beatrice would sit together by candlelight, reading or talking or simply being together. This is still my favorite part of the day, Beatrice told him one evening when James was 2. These quiet moments with you. Mine too, Rafe said, taking her hand across the table. The candlelight caught on the gold of her wedding band, worn smooth from years of wear. You know what I think about sometimes? What? That first day when you walked into White Pine looking so lost. What would have happened if I had not stopped to help? If we had never met, Beatrice shuddered. I do not like to think about that. You changed everything for me, Rafe. You gave me the ability to read, yes, but more than that, you gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. You gave me all those things too, Rafe said. I was just existing before you, not really living. You taught me what it meant to have something worth fighting for, worth building for. As the children grew, the house remained full of love. Tommy eventually married a girl from White Pine and built his own cabin nearby. Rose became a teacher, traveling to small communities throughout Montana Territory to teach children who might not otherwise have access to education. James, the baby, showed signs of following in his father's footsteps, spending every moment he could in the wilderness learning about trapping and hunting. Rafe and Beatrice grew older together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but the love between them never dimmed. Every evening, without fail, they sat together by candlelight, usually reading now from the newspapers and books that James brought back from town. or from the letters their children and grandchildren sent. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the house for a celebration. Tommy gave a speech, talking about how his parents' love had been the foundation that allowed all of them to thrive. Rose read a poem she had written about love and learning. James simply hugged them both, too overcome with emotion to speak. That evening, after everyone had left, Rafe and Beatrice sat at their table with a single candle between them, just like they had so many years ago. 25 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you were teaching me the alphabet. Other times, it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Rafe said. Every day with you is new and exciting, but I also cannot remember a time when I did not love you. Beatrice smiled, the candlelight softening the lines time had etched on her face. Read to me, she asked. Rafe picked up the book they had been working through, a collection of poetry Beatrice had ordered from the catalog. But before he could start reading, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. Actually, she said, I want to read to you. She took the book and opened it to a page she had marked. Then, in a clear, confident voice that held no trace of the uncertainty she had once felt, she began to read. Rafe listened, watching her face in the candlelight, and felt his heart swell with love and pride. This remarkable woman, who had once been ashamed to admit she could not read, now read with the confidence of someone who had never doubted herself. But more than that, she had taken her journey and used it to help others, to make the world a little better. When she finished the poem, Beatrice looked up to find Rafe watching her with tears in his eyes. What is wrong? She asked, concerned. Nothing is wrong, Rafe said, his voice rough. Everything is so very right. I was just thinking how lucky I am, how blessed. We are both blessed, Beatrice said, reaching across the table for his hand. They sat there in the candlelight, hands joined across the table, the same way they had sat hundreds, maybe thousands of times before. The candle burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the wind whispered through the pines. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends, weathered hard winters, celebrated the births of more grandchildren. Through it all, Rafe and Beatrice remained each other's constant, each other's comfort, each other's home. When Rafe was 72 and Beatrice was 69, he had a mild heart episode that frightened them both. The doctor from White Pine told him he needed to take it easier, not work so hard. So Rafe retired from trapping, content to spend his days in the garden or with his grandchildren, and his evenings always with Beatrice by candlelight. I am not ready to lose you, Beatrice told him one evening, her voice shaking. You are not going to lose me, Rafe promised. I am too stubborn to go anywhere. Besides, we have not finished that book yet. She laughed through her tears. We have a whole shelf of unfinished books. Then I definitely need to stick around, Rafe said, pulling her close. They kept their nightly tradition, reading together, talking about their day, their children, their life. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the candle burn down. The words they spoke mattered less than the simple fact of being together, of having this time. On a cool evening in October, when the aspens had turned gold and the first snow was threatening in the clouds overhead, Rafe and Beatrice sat at their table as usual. Beatrice was reading aloud from a letter Rose had sent, telling them about her latest teaching position and the students she was working with. She has your gift, Rafe observed, for teaching, for helping others learn. She has both our gifts, Beatrice corrected. Your patience and my determination. The perfect combination, Rafe agreed. The candle flickered and Beatrice paused in her reading to look at her husband. He looked peaceful, content, his silver hair catching the light. After more than 40 years of marriage, she still thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I love you," she said, setting down the letter. "I need you to know that every single day I thank God for bringing you into my life." "I love you too," Rafe said, "more than words can say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Brennan." She came around the table and settled into his lap, just like she had done thousands of times over the years. He wrapped his arms around her, and they sat there in the candlelight, wrapped in each other's love. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Beatrice asked. "When I confessed I could not read." "I told you a lot of things," Rafe said, smiling. "You told me that not knowing how to read did not make me helpless, that I was brave and strong. And then you offered to teach me, spending your evenings by candlelight to give me the gift of literacy." "Best decision I ever made," Rafe said. "Mine too," Beatrice agreed. "Accepting your offer, falling in love with you, building this life together, all of it the absolute best decisions." They sat there as the candle burned lower, talking about their life, their children, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were their legacy. They talked about the lessons by candlelight that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through everything. "Promise me something," Beatrice said eventually. "Anything," Rafe replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter where we end up, we will always find each other, that we will always have these moments together." "I promise," Rafe said solemnly. "In this life and whatever comes after, I will always find you, and we will always have our evenings by candlelight." As the years rolled on into their 70s and then 80s, Rafe and Beatrice remained devoted to each other. Their bodies grew frail, their steps slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. They moved into town eventually, into a small house near Tommy's family, but they brought their table and their candles with them, maintaining their nightly tradition. Their great-grandchildren would visit and find them sitting together by candlelight, reading or talking, hands joined across the table. The children found it romantic and sweet, not understanding the depth of the bond that had been forged in those quiet evening hours so many decades ago. On a spring evening in 1920, Rafe and Beatrice celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. It was a joyous celebration, full of laughter and love. But the best part, as always, was when everyone else had left and they could sit together at their table with a single candle burning between them. 53 years, Beatrice marveled. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Not long enough," Rafe said. "I could have 100 years with you and it would not be enough." "Then let us make every moment count," Beatrice said, and they did. Every evening they sat together by candlelight, reading, talking, simply being together. It was their sacred time, the continuation of what had begun so long ago when a lonely mountain man had offered to teach a young woman to read. The love they shared was a beacon to their family and everyone who knew them. It was a love built on respect and kindness, on patience and determination, on quiet evenings by candlelight and the simple gift of helping someone learn. It was a love that had weathered storms and celebrated joys, that had created a family and a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. Years later, when both Rafe and Beatrice had passed on peacefully, their children found boxes of letters they had written to each other, books they had read together, and journals Beatrice had kept chronicling their lessons and their life. Rose, herself now an elderly woman, read through these treasures with tears streaming down her face. They had something special, she told her own grandchildren, something rare and beautiful. It all started when Mother admitted she could not read, and Father spent every evening teaching her by candlelight. That simple act of kindness blossomed into a love that changed all our lives. The house in the mountains, expanded and improved over the years, remained in the family. Tommy's great-grandson eventually moved there with his own young family, and the tradition continued. Every evening, he would sit with his wife at the old wooden table, a candle burning between them, reading together or teaching their children, keeping alive the legacy that Rafe and Beatrice had begun. In the small cemetery outside White Pine, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Rafe and Beatrice Brennan. The inscriptions were simple, giving their names and dates, but visitors often noted that even in death they seemed to be together, their stones close enough that they might have been holding hands across the divide. Their story became legend in White Pine and the surrounding area. The mountain man and the woman who could not read, brought together by candlelight and kindness, building a love that lasted more than half a century and created a family tree that spread across Montana and beyond. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of a woman brave enough to admit her vulnerability and a man patient enough to help her overcome it, of quiet evenings spent in learning and love, of dedication and devotion, of building something beautiful from simple kindness. It was the story of how Beatrice Holt came to White Pine with nothing but determination and courage, how she confessed she could not read, and how mountain man Rafe Brennan spent every evening teaching her by candlelight. It was the story of how that teaching blossomed into the deepest love, and how that love created a legacy that would endure for generations. And in the hearts of all their descendants, in the memory of everyone who had known them, Rafe and Beatrice lived on, forever sitting at their table with a single candle burning between them, hands joined, eyes meeting across the flickering flame, speaking without words of a love that transcended time and death, a love that had begun with the simple gift of literacy and grown into something eternal and unbreakable. The lessons by candlelight had taught Beatrice to read, but they had taught both Rafe and Beatrice something far more important. They had learned that true love was built in quiet moments, in patience and kindness, in the willingness to help someone grow while growing together. They had learned that the greatest gift you could give someone was not things or money, but time and attention and the belief that they were worth investing in. And so their story ended not with sorrow but with celebration, not with loss but with the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. They had taken their chance encounter on a dusty street in White Pine and transformed it into a lifetime of happiness. They had proven that love, real love, was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about showing up every evening with a candle and a willingness to learn and teach and grow together. Their legacy lived on in every book their descendants read, in every child who learned their letters, in every couple who sat together in quiet companionship at the end of a long day. Rafe and Beatrice Brennan had shown them all what was possible when you led with kindness, when you saw past surface struggles to the strength beneath, when you committed to showing up day after day with patience and love. The candlelight that had illuminated their lessons all those years ago continued to shine, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can change everything, and that true love, once kindled, never truly dies but burns eternal in the hearts of those who witnessed it and those who carry on its legacy.